What is the true price of a soul? If a woman saved 100 children from a horrific death, but in doing so, remade them into something other, is she a savior or a monster? The people of Stonehaven had their answer. They called her a child murderer. But as the moon rose over the grim fortress, 100 small, loyal souls knew the truth, and they were coming to visit. The world had shrunk to damp, cold stone, and the constant, metallic taste of fear. Elara, once known for her gentle hands and knowledge of herbs, was now the plague mother, the child stealer of Stonehaven. The titles were a brand, seared into her by the terrified and the righteous. Led by Lord Valerius Blackwood, her cell was a hollowed-out rock, smelling of mildew, stale water, and despair. She sat in the center of the small space, her back straight against a habit born of dignity, not comfort. The ragged hem of her gray dress was damp. She focused on the rhythm of her breath, in and out, a slow and deliberate tide against the panic that lapped at the edges of her mind. Do not rush, she told herself. The story must be told at its own pace. A scuttling whisper, faint as a falling leaf, broke the silence. It came from a crack where the wall met the floor, a dark seam that drank the light. Elara's head, which had been bowed in exhaustion, lifted. A slow, deep breath filled her lungs, and the ghost of a smile touched her chapped lips. First came a nose, twitching, whiskers quivering, then two bright, black beads of eyes. A small, gray-furred rat emerged into the faint moonlight filtering through the high, barred window. It was followed by another and another, until a dozen of them sat in a semicircle before her, silent and attentive. "They call you vermin," Elara whispered, her voice a raspy echo in the tomb-like quiet. "But they do not know the strength it takes to move unseen. They do not know the courage of the small." The lead rat, slightly larger than the others, with a nick missing from its left ear, took a step forward. In the stillness of the cell, a connection snapped into place, not of sound, but of sense. Mother. The word was not a sound, but feeling, a thought that bloomed directly in her mind, warm and familiar. It was Boren. His name came to her not as a memory of a human face, but as the essence of the stubborn, practical boy he had been. "Boren," she breathed out, the name a prayer. "My little general, you are well. The walls are thick, but the paths are many." The thought voice returned, carrying a sense of busy determination. "The stone weeps water. It carves its own maps. We have been listening. We have been learning." Elara closed her eyes, allowing the wave of maternal affection to wash over her. This was the heart of her damnation and her salvation. The Black Plague had come to Stonehaven, a scythe of fever and blackened skin, reaping the young and the old without mercy. She had watched children she had helped bring into the world choke on their own blood, their bodies turning against them. In her desperation, she had delved into scrolls older than the fortress itself, finding a forgotten, forbidden ritual of the old gods. It spoke not of curing, but of transferring, a way to anchor a fleeing soul to a new, resilient vessel before the body succumbed. It was not a cure. It was a desperate, terrible, beautiful theft from death itself. The great plan, Boren's thought voice pressed, urgent and focused. It begins. The water runs south, under the storehouse, past the outer wall. The way is narrow, but it is a way. We are mapping the final channels. The great plan, their coordinated escape. A tremor of fear, sharp and cold, ran through her. It is too dangerous. The guards. Blackwood. We are not what we were. The thought voice was firm, edged with a rodent's tenacity. But we are not less. We are an army they cannot see. We are a key that fits no lock. Yet we will open the way. As if summoned by his declaration, a new shadow fell over them. A small, elegant fox, its coat a splash of fiery red in the gloom, slipped through the same crack with an impossible grace. It padded silently across the cold stone and, without a moment's hesitation, laid its head upon her lap. A sob caught in Elara's throat. This was Kalen, her last, the little boy with hair the color of autumn leaves, who had held her hand with a burning grip as the fever took him. Now he looked up at her with vulpine eyes that held a human soul's profound sorrow and love. She buried her fingers in the thick, soft fur of his neck, feeling the rapid, bird-like beat of his heart. He let out a soft whine, a sound so full of childlike need it shattered the last of her composure. This was the paradox, the beautiful and tragic truth they could never understand. The children had not died. They had changed. They had been given a second life, a wild and secret one, bound to her by a love that transcended flesh and form. "The world calls me your murderer," she whispered, her tears finally falling, dotting Kaelin's fur like dew. "But you are my children. You have always been my children." And in the silence of the dungeon, surrounded by the loyal souls she had saved and cursed, the first move in their impossible game was made. The great plan was in motion. How do you cage a memory? How do you imprison a whisper on the wind? Lord Valerius believed his stone walls and iron bars could contain the truth. But truth, like a seed in cracked stone, finds a way to grow towards the light. And the eyes watching from that light saw everything. The days in the dungeon were a blur of gray stone and the heavy tread of guards. But the nights belonged to Elara and her children. After the steadfast determination of the rats and the pure affection of the fox, a new presence arrived on a bitter wind that whistled through the window bars. A single, glossy black feather drifted down, spinning lazily in a moonbeam before settling on the floor. Then came a soft caw, more a greeting than a bird call. Perched on the iron bars, silhouetted against the sliver of moon, was a large raven. Its head was cocked, one sharp, intelligent eye fixed on Elara. "Morwen," Elara said, her voice warm with recognition. Of all her children, Morwen had been the oldest when the plague took him, a sharp-witted boy of 12 with a love for maps and stories of distant lands. His new form suited his restless spirit. The raven launched itself from the bars, its wings beating a soft whoosh in the stagnant air before it landed gracefully on a protruding stone near her. A new consciousness brushed against hers. Different from Boren's earthy pragmatism, it was sharper, more expansive, layered with the high perspective of the open sky. "The world outside grows impatient, Mother," Morwen's thought voice came, crisp and clear. "Blackwood speaks to the crowd. His words are stones, and he aims them all at you." A cold knot tightened in Elara's stomach. What is he saying? "He calls your actions a blasphemy that invited the gods' wrath. He says the plague only ended when you were captured." A flicker of dry amusement came through the link. A convenient timeline. The fools believe him. He has set a date. 3 days from now, in the main square. A public reckoning. The words hung in the air, colder than the dungeon's chill. A public reckoning. There was only one kind. The finality of it was a physical blow. They were out of time. The slow, careful planning was now a desperate race. The great plan. Elara breathed, her mind reeling. "We have only 3 nights. The plan must become a storm," Morwen responded, his mental voice now all strategy. "My eyes are everywhere. The guards change at the moonset. The post on the southern wall is lazy. He sleeps. The kennel master is fond of his ale. The hounds are slow and dull-witted after his indulgence. These are the cracks in their armor." He shared what he saw, and in Elara's mind, a map of Stonehaven began to form, not drawn on parchment, but woven from flight paths of ravens. She saw the courtyard, the gates, the guards' patrol routes, all from above, a perspective her captors could never comprehend. Morwen was not just a scout. He was the architect of their battlefield awareness. "My flock is ready," he continued. "We are the distraction. We are the chaos. When the time comes, we will be the shrieking wind in their faces, the shadows that blur their vision." As he spoke, a new layer of the plan solidified. It was no longer just about the rats navigating the underground or the fox offering comfort. It was about the sky itself turning against their oppressors. The coordination was breathtaking. Boren's earth, Morwen's sky. Just then, a heavy bolt on the main dungeon door screeched. Morwen melted back into the shadows of the high ceiling, becoming one with the darkness. The door swung open, and Ser Ricard entered with a wooden bowl of watery gruel. His eyes, as always, were wary. He placed a bowl on the floor, his gaze sweeping the cell. It lingered for a moment on Kalen, the little fox, who was curled up by Elara's side, perfectly still. Sarah Ricard's brow furrowed. He had stopped questioning the presence of the animals. He merely noted them, a silent puzzle he couldn't solve. His eyes then flicked upwards, towards the high window, and for a heart-stopping second, Elara thought he had seen Morwen. But the raven was a statue of shadow. Sarah Ricard's gaze was distant, troubled. He looked back at Elara, not with the open hatred of the other guards, but with a deep, unsettling confusion. He saw a frail, old woman, a condemned monster, yet her cell often felt more like a sanctuary than a prison. The contradiction was eating at him. Without a word, he turned and left, the bolt slamming back into place with a sound of grim finality. From the shadows, Morwen's thought voice returned, laced with the new intensity. The wolf doubts, a dangerous thing, or a useful one. The game had changed. The walls were closing in, but the sky was now on their side. The great plan was no longer a patient web. It was a fletched arrow, drawn back in a bow, aimed at the heart of their only chance. They had 3 days. 3 days until the pyre or the blade. 3 days to unleash the storm. What is the most dangerous weapon? A sword? A secret? It is the key that turns the lock. It is the unseen hand that holds it. While the ravens watched the sky and the rats mapped the dark, another child moved with a silence that could steal the very breath from a man's lips. The air in the cell was thick with a new, electric tension. The 3-day deadline, announced by Morwen, had transformed Elara's quiet endurance into a sharp, focused anxiety. She could feel the plan coiling tight, a spring being compressed. The spring needed a release. A lock needed a key. Tonight, it was Lyra's turn. There was no sound to announce her arrival. One moment, the patch of moonlight on the floor was empty. The next, a sleek, black cat sat within it, washing a paw with fastidious calm. Her eyes, like pools of liquid emerald, lifted to meet Elara's. This was Lyra. In life, she had been a quiet, observant girl who could disappear in a crowded room. In death, she had perfected the art. Mother, Lyra's thought voice was a silken thread, cool and composed. The keeper of the keys drinks deep from his flask tonight. His breath smells of juniper and regret. A flicker of hope, sharp and dangerous, sparked in Elara's chest. "The key ring," she whispered into the stillness. "It hangs from his belt," Lyra responded, her mental tone as precise as a surgeon's blade. "A heavy iron thing. It smells of old iron and pride. The one for the outer postern gate is the longest, with a twisted head, like a serpent." She had not just seen it. She had studied it, memorized its every detail with a predator's focus. Elara felt a memory surge forth, unbidden and painful. The night she had performed the ritual on Lyra. The girl had been so still, so accepting, even as the fever ravaged her. Her mother had wailed, "She was always so quiet. Now she will be silent forever." But she was wrong. Lyra's silence was not an absence, it was a weapon. "I will bring you its shape," Lyra thought. And before Elara could form a warning, the cat was gone, a shadow dissolving into deeper shadow. The wait was an agony. Elara sat frozen, every sense stretched taut. She heard the distant, muffled laughter of the guards, the clank of a distant cup. She imagined Lyra, a sliver of darkness, weaving between their legs, her passage no more noticeable than a draft. The stakes were unimaginable. If she were caught, if even a single guard saw a cat paying too much attention to the keys, the entire plan would crumble to dust. An eternity seemed to pass, measured by the frantic beating of her own heart. Then a soft thud. Lyra was back, a different, darker patch of dampness staining the fur around her mouth. She dropped a small, gray lump of clay onto the floor before Elara. He spilled his drink. Lyra's thought voice came, a hint of feline satisfaction in its cool tone. In his clumsiness, he dropped the keys into the wet patch by the fire. "I merely," borrowed the impression while he cursed the heavens. Elara reached out with a trembling hand and picked up the lump of clay. There, pressed into its surface, was a perfect, intricate impression of the large, serpent-headed key. It was cold and gritty against her skin. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever held. "Lyra, you brilliant, brave child," Elara breathed, her voice thick with emotion. The cat blinked slowly, then walked over, butting her head briefly against Elara's knee. The contact was fleeting, but the wave of fierce, protective love that came with it was overwhelming. Lyra's affection was not like Kaelin's open devotion. It was a choice, a loyalty earned and given in absolute, silent terms. Bourne's workers will know what to do with this, Lyra thought. She settled herself beside the little fox, Kaelin, who slept on, unaware. The two forms, predator and prey in the natural world, lay side by side in perfect peace, bound by a shared soul and a shared mother. Elara clutched the clay impression, feeling its weight. This was no longer just a plan whispered in the dark. They now possessed the physical means to walk free. The key was made of mud, but it was more powerful than any iron. It was a promise of a door swinging open on silent hinges, of a path leading out of the darkness, paved with the silent steps of her children. The storm was gathering, and now it had a key. What is the currency of salvation? Is it measured in breaths preserved, or in the quality of the life that remains? Elara had traded human forms for animal ones, and in the cold silence of her cell, she balanced the books of her soul. The key was made, the plan was set, but the heart has its own reckoning, and it demanded to be heard. The clay impression was gone, spirited away by Boren's most trusted miners, to be replicated in gnawed wood and stolen metal. The plan was now a living, breathing entity, ticking down with the relentless beat of time. Yet, in the eye of this gathering storm, there was a profound, aching quiet. Kaelin, the little fox, was restless. He paced the perimeter of the cell, his red brush of a tail twitching, his ears swiveling at every distant sound. He could feel the tension in his mother, a scent of fear and determination that clung to her like perfume. Finally, he came to her, nudging her still hands with his cool, wet nose. Elara looked down into his eyes, those ancient, knowing eyes set in a wild face, and saw the little boy who loved stories. Mother, his thought voice was a soft, plaintive chime in her mind, so different from the others. It was not layered with strategy or silent resolve, but with a pure, childlike need. The story, the one about the moon and the rabbit, a fresh wave of grief, so potent it was physical, washed over her. It was a tale she told him in the final, fever-haunted hours before the ritual. A story to soothe a dying child. Her voice was a fragile thread as she began, the words a familiar, painful liturgy. Once, the moon was dark and lonely in the sky. It had no light of its own, and the world below was plunged into endless night. Kaelin curled into her lap, a warm, trembling weight. He let out a soft whimper, urging her on. The moon asked the stars for their light, but they were too small and too far away. It asked the sun, but the sun could not share its fire without burning the moon to ashes. She stroked the fur between his ears, her fingers remembering the feel of his sweat-dampened hair. So the moon asked the animals. The bear offered its roar, but that was not light. The wolf offered its howl, but that was not light either. She felt his small body begin to shake. A low, keening sound started deep in his throat. Then a small, brave rabbit approached the moon. It had nothing to offer but itself, and in a tremendous act of faith, it leaped from the highest peak, straight into the dark, cold heart of the moon. Elara's voice broke, and its pure, selfless love it ignited. It filled the moon with a soft, silver light, which it then shared with all the world, so that no one would ever have to be in the dark again. The keening sound erupted into a full, shuddering sob. It was not a fox's yelp. It was the raw, gut-wrenching cry of a human child. Kaelin buried his face against her stomach, his whole small form convulsing with the force of his grief. "I am the rabbit," his thought voice wailed. Thick with tears she could not see but could feel soaking through her dress. "I jumped, Mother. I jumped for you. And now I am here. And I am not me. And I want to go home." The confession shattered her. This was the core of it, the beautiful, terrible truth she had to face. She had saved them from death, but she had cursed them with this duality, this eternal homesickness for a self they could never fully reclaim. She wrapped her arms around him, holding the weeping fox-child tight. "Oh, my darling boy," she whispered into his fur, her own tears falling freely. "You are my light. You are all my lights in the dark, and I will take you home. Not to the home we knew, but to a new one, a home in the deep woods, under the moon you helped light. I promise." She rocked him, this creature of earth and spirit, until his sobs subsided into ragged, hiccuping breaths, and he fell into an exhausted sleep in her lap. The cell was silent once more, but the air was now heavy with the cost of their future. The key was forged. The path was mapped. But this moment, this heartbreak, was the true crucible. It was no longer about escaping Stonehaven. It was about proving to this weeping child in her arms that his sacrifice had meaning, that his love was not a spark that would be extinguished on a pyre, but a flame that would guide them all to a new dawn. The plan had gained its soul, and its soul was heavy with love. What breaks a man's faith? Not a shouted argument, but a quiet contradiction. Not a grand heresy, but a small, persistent truth that gnaws at the foundation of his beliefs. Sarah Card was a man built on such foundations: duty, order, and the clear line between guilt and innocence. That line was beginning to blur. The night was deep, the kind of silence that felt like a held breath. Sarah Card made his rounds, his boots echoing with a hollow finality in the torchlit corridors. His hand rested on the pommel of his sword, a familiar comfort. But tonight the comfort felt false. He stopped before the heavy oak door of Cell 7, the plague mother's cell. He had seen the old woman inside, day after day. He had heard the vitriol of Lord Blackwood, the terrified gossip of the townsfolk. He had prepared himself to guard a monster, a hag whose very touch was corruption. But the monster he expected was not the woman he saw. Through the small, barred window in the door, he peered inside. The scene that met his eyes was so profoundly ordinary, so deeply wrong for this place of punishment, that it stole the air from his lungs. Elara sat against the far wall, her head bowed. Curled against her side was the little red fox, its eyes closed in peaceful sleep. But it was the rest of the scene that froze Ricard's blood. A dozen rats sat in a perfect, silent semicircle before her, not as scavengers, but as a council of tiny, fur-clad generals. Their attention was fixed on her, unwavering, and perched on a stone ledge above her, barely visible in the gloom, was a large raven, its head cocked as if listening to a secret symphony. They were not just in her cell. They were with her. As he watched, one of the rats, the one with the nicked ear, scurried forward and nudged a small, crudely shaped piece of wood towards her foot. It was a shape Ricard recognized, a shape that haunted his dreams, the rough form of a key. Elara looked at it, then nodded slowly, a general approving a battle plan. The movement was his undoing. His scabbard scraped against the stone doorframe. In an instant, the scene dissolved into a silent explosion of precision. The rats vanished into the cracks in the wall like liquid shadow. The raven took flight without a sound, melting into the darkness of the high ceiling. Only the fox remained, lifting its head to fix him with a gaze that was far too intelligent, far too knowing. Elara's eyes met his through the grate. There was no panic there, no guilt, only a deep, weary resolve. Ricard fumbled with the heavy keys at his belt, his heart hammering against his ribs. He shoved the door open, the wood groaning in protest. He stood there, framed in the doorway, his sword half drawn. What witchcraft is this?" he demanded, his voice rough, betraying his fear. "What are you doing with these creatures?" Elara did not stand. She merely looked at him, her gaze steady. "They are not creatures, Sir Knight. They are my children." The statement was so insane, so utterly blasphemous, that it should have been easy to dismiss. But he had seen them. He had seen the way they looked at her, the way they obeyed her. "They are vermin," he spat, but the words lacked conviction. "Are they?" she asked, her voice soft as falling ash. "Do vermin hold counsel? Do they carve keys? Or do they simply love their mother?" Her words struck him with the force of a physical blow. Love, that was the unnameable thing he had felt in this cell. It wasn't the foul miasma of dark magic he'd been taught to expect. It was the same fierce, protective energy he felt when he thought of his own sister, safe in their village far away. He looked at the little fox, who had not flinched, who still watched him with those unsettlingly wise eyes. He remembered the rat with the wooden key, the strategic placement of the raven. This was not mindless devotion. This was an alliance, an army. Lord Blackwood's fanatical speeches echoed in his mind. She perverted nature. She consorts with demons. But the truth in this cell felt different. It felt ancient and sorrowful and terrifyingly pure. His sword hand fell away from the pommel. The fight drained out of him, leaving only a vast, unsettling confusion. He was the guard. She was the prisoner. But in this moment, he was the one who felt captive to a truth he could not unsee. "They call me a murderer," Elara whispered, her eyes never leaving his. "But what do your own eyes tell you?" Sarah Card had no answer. He took a step back, then another. He pulled the heavy door shut, the bolt sliding home with a sound that felt less like a lock engaging and more like the sealing of his own fate. He had come to confront a monster and had found a mother surrounded by her children, and he did not know which was more dangerous to the world he swore to uphold. The foundation of his duty had not just cracked, it had crumbled to dust. What is the sound of 100 hearts beating as one? It is not a drum, but a silence so deep and so vast it has its own gravity, pulling all light and sound into its core. In the dark of the dungeon, that silence had a name, and it was waiting. The final day dawned, a pale, sickly light that did nothing to warm the stones of Stonehaven. Elara did not sleep. She sat in the center of her cell, a statue of calm in the eye of the hurricane. The air itself was thick with impending fury, heavy with the scent of ozone before a lightning strike. The reports came in, one by one, a symphony of silent communication. First, Moore from the high window. His thought voice was sharp, clipped, a general delivering his final briefing. "It is done. The square is prepared. Blackwood's platform, the pyre, they are built." A wave of cold dread accompanied the word pyre. "The crowd gathers already. They are afraid. They want a spectacle. He will give them one at high sun." Elara's blood ran cold, but she gave a single, firm nod. The timeline was absolute. "High sun. My flock is in position," Morwen continued. "In the eaves, in the bell tower, in the gnarled oak by the gate. We are the shrieking wind. We are the blinding shadow. On your word." He fell silent, his mission clear. Next, a scuttling from a crack in the wall. Borat emerged, his small body thrumming with a focused energy. Behind him, the darkness in the crack seemed to shift and pulse with 1,000 unseen bodies. "The way is open," his earthy thought voice declared. "The last grate is gnawed through. The path through the water channels is clear. It emerges beyond the outer wall, in the reeds by the river. The final key is made." He gestured with his nose to a small, rough-hewn but unmistakable iron key, still wet from the channel, lying just inside the crack. It was a twin to the one on the guard's ring, born of mud and tooth and desperate love. "The earth is ready," Boran finished. "We are the teeth in the stone. We are the flood from below." Then, a whisper of movement from the corner. Lyra the cat materialized, her green eyes glowing. The keeper of the keys sleeps off his drink, her silken thought voice reported. "The way to the postern gate is clear. I have walked it. The guard there is dull and stares at the sky. I am the silence in the corridor. I am the unlocked door." All the pieces were in place. Sky, earth, and shadow. All that was missing was the heart. Kalen, the little fox, pressed himself against her side. He was trembling, but not with fear, with anticipation. He looked up at her, and his thought voice was small but steady. "I am the light," he thought, echoing the story. "I will show you the way." Elara reached out with her mind, not to one, but to all of them. She cast her consciousness out through the stone, up through the air, into the hidden passages. She felt them, 100 small, bright sparks of loyalty and love, a constellation of purpose waiting for its catalyst. My children, she thought, and the words were a balm and a battle cry. My brave, beautiful children, you were never lost. You were only waiting. Today, we do not run from our past. We reclaim our future. Remember your parts. Be swift. Be silent. Be fierce. For today we go home. A wave of affirmation washed back at her. A chirp from the rafters, a scuttle from the walls, a purr from the shadows, a soft whine from her side. It was a chorus without sound. A single, unified will. She picked up the cold, rough iron key. It felt like destiny in her hand. Outside, she could hear the distant murmur of the crowd growing, a beast stirring from its slumber. Lord Blackwood was giving them what they wanted, but he had no idea what he was about to unleash. The storm was no longer gathering. It was here. It sat in a dungeon cell, holding a key, surrounded by 100 loyal souls. It was patient. It was ready. It was waiting for the sun to reach its zenith, for a single door to open, and then the silence would break. The sound that came was not the turning of a key, but the turning of the world. High above, the sun reached its zenith, a brilliant, pitiless eye. A roar went up from the square, 1,000 voices screaming for blood and righteousness. In the depths of the dungeon, the roar was a muffled wave, a pressure change in the air. It was the signal. Elara's hand, clutching the rough iron key, was steady. She looked at her children one last time. Kaelin, a coil of tense muscle and fire-red fur, by her feet. Lyra, a sliver of living shadow by the door. Boren, a general at the head of his unseen legion. Morwen, a sentinel in the high dark. Now, she thought, the word was not a sound, but a tremor that ran through the very stone of Stonehaven. It began with Morwen's sky. From the eaves, the bell tower, the gnarled oak, a black cloud erupted. It was not a cloud of weather, but a feather, claw, and fury. 100 ravens, crows, and jackdaws rose as one entity, their cacophony of physical force that slammed into the square. They did not merely caw. They screamed, a dissonant symphony of rage that drowned out the crowd's bloodlust. They dove as one, not at the people, but with brilliant, terrifying precision. At the faces of the guards lining the platform, at the horses rearing in panic, at Lord Blackwood himself, who threw up his arms as a living, shrieking tempest of blackness enveloped him. The sky had fallen, and it was made of feathers. Below, in the sudden chaos, the earth answered. From every crack in the cobblestones, from every drain and gutter, a gray tide poured forth. Boren's army. They moved not as scattered vermin, but as a coordinated swarm. They flowed up the legs of the guards, their sharp teeth finding tender flesh, not to maim, but to madden. They did not bite and hold. They bit and vanished, 1,000 pinpricks of agony and shock that destroyed all discipline. A guard would scream, batting at his legs, only to find his companions similarly besieged. Swords clattered to the ground as men danced a frantic, horrifying jig against an enemy that was everywhere and nowhere. In the dungeon corridor, the silence was absolute. Ser Ricard stood frozen before Elara's cell, his hand on his sword, his face a mask of torn duty and dawning comprehension. The sounds of chaos from above were a distant war, but the war in his soul was here now. Lyra moved, a blur of black. She leaped onto a stool, then onto a high shelf, her paw hooking a heavy ring of keys left by a distracted guard. She dragged them, clattering, to the floor, nudging them towards the cell door with her nose. Her emerald eyes locked with Ricard's. It was not a plea. It was a demand. He looked from the cat to the door, to the keys. He saw the little fox inside, standing protectively in front of Elara, a low growl rumbling in its chest, a human warning in a beast's throat. He saw the old woman, her gaze not on him, but on her children, her face a portrait of agonized love and fierce pride. With a cry that was part anguish, part liberation, Ser Ricard made his choice. He snatched the keys from the floor, his hands fumbling, and shoved the correct one into the lock. The mechanism turned with a groan that seemed to shake the foundations of his old life. The door swung open. Elara did not hesitate. She stepped out, Kaelin at her heel. She looked at Ricard, and for a single, suspended moment, their eyes met. No words passed between them. A nod of profound gratitude, a nod of grim acceptance. It was enough. To the postern gate. Ricard barked, his soldier's instinct taking over. This way, they moved, a strange procession. The disgraced knight, the condemned witch, the fox, and the shadow cat. The corridor was a chaos of echoes, the sounds of the avian assault and the rodent uprising filtering down. They passed guards who were either running towards the square or standing in bewildered terror, too confused by the surreal nature of the attack to notice the escaping prisoner. They reached a heavy, iron-banded door, the postern gate. Ricard shoved it open, revealing a sliver of daylight and the path to freedom. And there stood Lord Valerius Blackwood. He was disheveled, his fine robes torn, a long scratch bleeding down his cheek. His eyes were wide with a fury that bordered on madness. In his hand, he held a naked sword. "Which," he spat, his voice a ragged shred of its former authority. "You think your demons can save you? I will send you back to the hell that spawned you myself." He lunged, not at Elara, but at Ricard, seeing the traitor as the first and greatest sin. Time seemed to slow. Ricard raised his own sword, the clash of steel ringing sharp and clean against the distant chaos. But Blackwood was driven by fanaticism, his strength unnatural. He beat Ricard's guard down, his blade slicing deep into the knight's shoulder. Ricard cried out, stumbling back, his sword skittering across the stone. Blackwood turned, his eyes burning with triumph, and raised his sword for the final, killing blow against Elara. He never saw the fire-red missile that launched itself from the ground. Kaelin, the little fox, moved with a speed that defied nature. He did not snarl or bark. He was silent, a bolt of pure, protective fury. He leaped, not for the sword arm, but for the man's face. His jaws clamped down on Blackwood's nose and cheek with the sickening crunch. Blackwood screamed a high, terrible sound of shock and agony. He staggered back, dropping his sword to claw at the creature attached to his face. He ripped Kaelin away, hurling the small body against the stone wall. The fox landed in a heap and did not move. A sound tore from Elara's throat, a raw, primal scream of loss that eclipsed all other noise. It was the signal for the final, personal wave of the storm. From the open door, from the shadows, from the very air, her children converged. Lyra became a whirlwind of claws, shredding Blackwood's hands as he tried to cover his bleeding face. Boran and a dozen of his largest rats swarmed up the Lord's legs, their teeth finding his thighs, his groin. From above, Morwen Dove, his sharp beak aiming unerringly for the man's eyes. Lord Valerius Blackwood did not die a clean death. He died as he had lived, in a storm of his own making, screaming not in prayer, but in terror, brought down not by an army of men, but by the righteous, coordinated fury of a mother's children. The silence that followed was heavier than any that had come before. Elara stumbled to Kaelin's side, gathering his limp form into her arms. A soft, piteous whine escaped him. He was alive, bruised, broken, but alive. She held him close, her tears falling onto his fur. She looked up. The postern gate stood open. The path to the river, to the woods, to freedom was clear. Ser Ricard, clutching his bleeding shoulder, leaned against the doorway, his face pale but resolute. Around them, her army stood, sat and perched. The rats, the cats, the birds of the air. They were bloodied. Some were wounded, but they were victorious. They watched her waiting. Lyra, the plague mother, rose to her feet, her child cradled in her arms. She did not look back at the darkness of Stonehaven. She walked through the gate, into the light, her strange, beautiful, terrible family flowing around her like a living river. They were not monsters. They were not demons. They were a new creation, a family forged in plague and punishment, bound by a love that had shattered stone and defied death itself. They moved into the tall grass, towards the whispering trees. their forms merging with the shadows of the wild. They were going home. Thank you for watching. First of all, the stories we tell are either entirely fictional or inspired by real events. If you have any stories you'd like to share with us, let's chat in the comment section. If you liked our story, we'd appreciate it if you gave our video a like. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to stay updated on our next videos. You can check out the playlist created for other stories on our channel in the card section at the top right. See you in the next video.